Welcome everyone to this progress report webinar, which we're calling Raising Ambition and Improving Integration. And we'll show you throughout the slides that we're sharing today why we're calling it that. We're giving you an overall of the findings that we found from our progress report and some other things from the CEO study that we did this year. And it'll be an overview and you'll understand why we're using this as our thinking and narrative ahead of the forthcoming decade, because we've now got 10 more years to deliver against these goals, and the data that we've got in this progress report helps us set our agenda. So today, who is taking you through all this data is myself, Sue. I'm the Chief of Outreach and Engagement, and I work closely with Sean, who will introduce himself to you in a minute, to get this data to you and to help understand what it's telling us about what we need to do next.
Yeah, hi, good morning, everyone. This is Sean. I'm the head of technology and data here at the UN Global Compact, and I'm sort of the data manager and survey excelsior, if you will, for both the progress report and the CEO study. So I'll be the one walking you through a lot of the details and kind of talking through all the data with Sue. And yeah, looking forward to it.
Great, thanks, Sean. There's a lot of information going ahead that we've got through the whole of this report. We're going to give you very much the top line, and we'll be able to follow up with anything else, and you can ask us lots of questions. Throughout this webinar, if you can text in questions, you can click here on the Q&A, keep writing them through. We will answer as many towards the end, but also we'll be available afterwards to follow up on anything else. But let's go through the top line of the information right now. First, a little bit of background for anybody who might not be fully familiar with the Global Compact, just to remind ourselves, what we're here for. We are essentially a call to companies across the world to align their operations and strategies with universal principles that have been signed and ratified by the UN. We have a mandate to therefore support the global business community to help us deliver those goals. When we first launched the initiative, it was to support the Millennium Development Goals, and now obviously we're trying to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals. More to that later. There's 10,000 companies now working with us to help try to deliver these goals. We're across the world in 160 countries and in 67 local networks, of whom a lot of their activity is also illustrated in the progress report. We'll give you a little bit of information about that later. This makes us the largest corporate sustainability initiative in the world, which is great because with more organizations, the faster we will be able to deliver against these goals. So Sean's going to give us a little bit more understanding about exactly how the survey is administered and where the data that we're going to share with you today is actually coming from.
That's right. So of the 10,000 participants, we each year conduct a survey to just understand the progress that companies are making against the 10 principles. As Sue said, companies are committing to these UN conventions, and so we utilize this survey as a way to better understand, what the companies are doing. So last year, or earlier this year, I should say, we got 1,600 responses to the survey, which is good because that constitutes about 25% response rate, which is great because when conducting this type of research, anything over a 10% response rate is generally good. And then when you look at the actual breakdown of the regions that were represented in the survey response set, as well as the sectors and the size of companies based on annual revenue, it's actually commensurate with the actual Global Compact participant base. So you'll see, there's 857 responses from Europe, but that's also what we see in the actual totality of the Global Compact participant base. Obviously, moving forward, when we conduct this type of research in the future, we'd like to see, greater representation from regions such as Africa and MENA, but that also comes with ensuring that we get more participants from those areas as well. Which is partly why opportunities like this to promote it, our initiative, are important. I should also say that we will be touching on some data points from the CEO study, which was also conducted earlier this year. And the CEO study received nearly 1,000 responses and was supplemented by 120 interviews with CEOs. And we're going to do a deeper dive on the CEO study in early January. But we'll touch on a couple of key figures here, but just to say that study we'll highlight in a couple of weeks.
Great, thanks, Sean. Yeah, the CEO study will also give you some good understanding about what leadership are thinking. So key findings, as I said, I'm going to give an overview as literally of the broad findings that we have and sort of set the scene a little bit, and then we can go into a little bit more detail. This first slide here is not the data from our study, but it comes from UN studies, other studies that have been done throughout 2019, which collectively show that we are not on track to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals at the moment. Antonio Guterres has made that clear, saying that, you know, we're not on track yet, but that key CEOs in the world and the business community are absolutely committed to, absolutely critical to delivering these goals, to eradicating poverty, and to sort out this climate crisis. So, you know, we know that we have to do this, but we're not quite on track. There's a couple of numbers here that I've got. There are plenty that you can look at in detail, but some big ones to highlight to frame our thinking. In terms of gender, making a lot of progress in gender, but we're still way behind. It's going to take us 200 years to get to close the gender gap. We all know the plastics problem in terms of the oceans, and also you may have seen that earlier this week, a report coming out showing the O2 depletion in the ocean, and now there are 700 sites in the ocean that have severe O2 depletion. We're still seeing child labor in our supply chains, 150 million children. That hasn't changed in the last few years. The biggest issue that we're facing, which we're all aware of, is the global warming crisis, and we need to find a way to shift our activities towards a 1.5 degree warming scenario, and that is having impact on, obviously, species on the planet, life on land. There's many others, but we just wanted to highlight a few ones, and that is not to undermine, to negate the fact that there has been extreme and really great progress. It's just that we need to increase our ambitions and our progress if we're going to deliver the goals. So what's going on in overall terms? I think the first thing that we've seen really clearly is there is huge awareness and a lot of commitment from business community. 88% of CEOs are increasingly aware of the issues. They agree that the overall global system needs to refocus onto equitable growth. So this is a broad understanding and a broad belief that our whole system needs to work so that it leaves no one behind and that it doesn't further damage the planet that we're all living on. So we have a big alignment on that area. The next thing is that we see is that CEOs really can see that sustainability is not only critical today, but is going to become more and more important. So in all the drivers of value, I'm looking at brand reputation, revenue growth, in terms of risk mitigation, cost reduction, all these things will be more impacted by sustainable practices in the future. So the dark blue line is sustainability helping create value today? The light blue line underneath it shows in the next 5 to 10 years, how much will sustainability be affecting these drivers? And in every single one of those, you see CEOs believing that sustainability will be more impactful. And interestingly, when you dig underneath it, what we find is the main driver, over 55% of CEOs believe that the #1 driver for this is consumers and the public. So, and less so regulation from governments, which as well we are going to see a lot of coming forward. But they recognize that it isn't just a regulation issue. People, the public, employees want to see this change. So again, a lot of engagement in the whole area of sustainability. Because of that, we see a lot of companies taking actions on the goals, like 81% of them are, and close to 70% of the CEOs are personally leading the agenda in their organizations. So once again, we see CEOs understanding the issue, recognizing the business case, recognizing the value for their organization, and therefore leading the charge through the company. Because of that, and obviously we would expect it, given that our organization is a call to action to align companies against these principles, we do see high integration at policy level of all the principles: human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. So that's encouraging, and we can see those policies being set into all of our organizations. So when we look back at that, we go, well, okay, that's interesting. We're not on track, but we have a lot of engagement, understanding, et cetera, et cetera. So what's happening? And 71% of companies, of CEOs, really believe that the business can play a critical role in contributing to the goals. So everyone understands it. But of that same community, only 21% of them think they really are. So this is interesting. We understand it, we have high awareness, we have high engagement, a lot of action being happening. But somewhere along the lines, this is CEOs themselves saying, yeah, we're not taking enough action. So what Sean and I have done in looking at all this data that we have is to try to understand where's this gap. So we have over 90% engagement across all of our principles. We see 80% engagement in affecting the goals. So what is it that's happening? And I'm going to turn over to Sean a little bit here to explain what we find in the data to help us try and understand how we should all be gearing up in the next decade.
Yeah, Sue, I mean, that's a very interesting point and interesting, if you will, theme that we see across the data in both the progress report and looking at the CEO study, where, you know, there's definitely an expression of interest and awareness of the agenda and the need and the urgency. But then when you look at the actual like specific implementation points, the deeper you get within the organization, both like at the headquarter level and through the supply chain, and this is what we're about to show you now, that's where you see much more complexity and much more challenges for companies to actually, you know, follow through. So I'm going to just take a couple minutes to walk you through a couple of key data points. The way that we structure the survey is to look at the 10 principal areas where we structure them around those 4 issue points of human rights, labor, environment, anti-corruption. And then we'll touch a little bit on what companies are saying they're doing in terms of implementing against the SDGs. So let's just sort of start at the top line in terms of the 10 principles. We looked at how companies are integrating these principles in their operations and how they do business. And we see that a couple interesting things here where, unfortunately, you know, while we do encourage companies to ensure that they're starting by just assessing their own risks and impacts against the 10 principles, that a lot of companies seemingly are just kind of skipping this first integral step. They're kind of just jumping to ensuring that by, you know, once committing to the 10 principles, that they're reflecting in their policy documents and things like that, which is great. And it's a good first step, no doubt. But we want to ensure that companies do have a better understanding of the impacts that they are having and where they operate. And so then when you look at like the integration points, I mean, one thing that, you know, we'd like to see more of is that there only 13% of companies are actually requiring their suppliers to ensure that they have a commitment to the 10 principles and to have that really on paper in terms of how they're doing business. And we'd like to see more of that because we feel that, you know, that's one of those deeper integration points where if a company is ensuring that the 10 principles will be reflected in their procurement practices, that it will have just ripple effects through their value chain. I mean, on the plus side, I mean, more companies are measuring their impacts on labor and environment, but less so on anti-corruption and human rights. I mean, this is something we've seen year and we understand that those are more complex to measure, but they're of critical importance as well. And fortunately, I mean, I think because it's part of the requirement of being in the Global Compact, you know, over 70% of companies are indicating that they're publicly communicating or reporting their performance. So that's positive, at least, and we'd like to see even more of that. So looking specifically at the human rights principles, you know, it's great to see that, you know, the human rights principles are being reflected in terms of workplace health and safety, non-discrimination, gender equality. But then, you know, what gets a little concerning is to see that one of these like really important points around the adequate standard of living is quite low. And so the thing is, in looking at the data, you know, this is helpful for us and we're reacting to it. Right, Sue, we this year are putting in place work to address this exact point, right?
Yeah, I think this is quite interesting because we separately, the group of companies that lead the action platform on decent work, they're really wanting to tackle this question of living poverty and living wage. So that's what those leaders have come up with as the agenda that they want to look at in the coming certainly next year and in the years afterwards. And then our data is reflecting the same thing.
Right.
That, we're understanding, obviously, gender, we're looking at non-discrimination, we're looking at, there's a lot of equity management in organizations. But when you really go right down to the detail of the last person in your supply chain, are they being paid enough? We don't necessarily know. It's really hard, but it's clearly the thing that we're going to be working on the next action platform. It's obviously a critical one.
That's right. That's right. So then looking at the labor principles, here, this is a bit more of a positive story, fortunately, in seeing that labor rights are being addressed in company policies, particularly around non-discrimination, safe working conditions, equal opportunity. No child labor and forced labor are still above, are still the majority are implementing, but we would like to see even more in the future. Then looking at how we're implementing throughout the operations and supply chain, this is where we also see some interesting findings. So in terms of specific activities that companies could be implementing around human rights and labor, well, we see half or over half of companies are implementing through training and awareness programs for employees. Again, when we look at things that are admittedly more complex and tricky to implement in terms of impact assessments and ensuring that these policies are reflected through their supply chains, we're seeing that's much more challenging for companies. And still, even these global compact companies are only a quarter of which have them in place. But again, we're putting in place a lot of work, right, Sue, in these areas just to help companies and guide them on the way. Do you want to?
Yeah, we have a really good resource which is helping, which is how you set human rights policy in the organization and translate it through. I think that would really help. We've got a new resource coming out which has just been launched in terms of navigating the future of business and human rights. And in February, we'll be launching a responsible procurement toolkit. And all of these will help this question of how to integrate, how to train, how to really integrate human rights in throughout the organization. Because, that does underpin everything.
It's all right. That's it. And so another area where, admittedly it was of concern is looking at the 10th principle on anti-corruption. And this year, these charts here show you kind of what the responses looked like in 2009, last year, and then this year. And you see that between 2009 and 2018, there was a bit of a rise, but then this year, there was a bit of a fall in terms of companies that have anti-corruption specific codes or within an overall code or zero tolerance policy. So this also is something that raised a real alarm bells for us. And so we're doubling down on the work that we're putting into helping companies have more specific guidance on how to address this. Sue, do you want to talk to the framework?
I think we have some good academy sessions about how to integrate anti-corruption principles right through the organization. I think that the target of zero tolerance has got to be, it's got to be 100%. You can't have half a tolerance on anti-corruption. No, it needs to be zero.
It doesn't work that way.
And we have a business against corruption framework, which we can help organizations with.
That's right. Okay, so that was a good, just quick overview in terms of the data around the 10 principles. So I just want to do a little dive into the global goals. But Sue, actually, why don't you kick it off?
I think this is an important point. When we were looking at the integration of human rights principles throughout through the data, I thought this would be a worthwhile thing to think about. It's been worked out and studied through by the Danish Institute for Human Rights, that if you take every one of these 169 goals that are underneath every sustainable development goal, 92% of them are linked to human rights principles, conventions. So really, the sustainable development goal agenda, which would make sense because it is the UN's agenda, is a human rights agenda. So I think when we look at the integration of business and human rights throughout our businesses, it probably will affect the speed at which we can deliver the sustainable development goals. So I think that's when we look at the data that we have on goals, on SDGs, it's always worth bearing that in mind.
Right. And I think it's also important to point out that, it's human rights, but it's also just the general notion of the 10 principles as a
Yes.
whole, taking the principle-based approach. So,
Yeah.
ensuring that it's human rights, but as well
Yeah.
as, ensuring that these
Yeah.
are underpinning how your companies are approaching the goals altogether.
I mean, it's essentially a human approach.
That's right.
I mean, it's interesting. It's about values and principles. If you take a human approach to everything, how would you treat your family? How would you treat your best friends? Well, that's how we should treat everybody.
Everybody.
That's basically what this tells us.
Exactly. So we asked companies a few questions around the goals. So one being, what are the goals that they're taking action against? I mean, we do advise companies, by taking a principle-based approach, to also start with a honest prioritization of what are the goals that are particularly of most relevance and import to them. I mean, we do understand that there's this interconnectivity between the goals that we want companies to be mindful of. But in terms of prioritization of what they're taking action against, you see that, and this is fairly consistent over the past couple of years, where the top 3 goals that companies are finding relevant to be taking action against are Goal 8 on decent work, Goal 5 on gender equality, and Goal 3 on good health and well-being. You do see, it's, I think, worth pointing out that there's a bit of a drop-off for goals 15, life below water, 0 hunger, and life on land. So, I mean, we do think that this is important to keep in mind because, I mean, companies do have impacts, whether intended or unintended, on these goals. And so, we do have work in this area as well to help help educate and help companies get involved and engaged.
Yeah.
Sue, do you want to say
the only other thing as well I remember is that the hierarchy of these has changed in only one way, which is that the climate action target has gone higher up. Same level of activity, but more companies are prioritizing this one, which kind of makes sense. And I would imagine even more after this year.
Exactly. So how are companies taking actions? So one of the number one ways that companies say that they're taking action is by upholding the 10 principles of the UN Global Compact. I mean, that's great. I mean, it's good to see that the companies are seeing the relevance of the 10 principles to the agenda. But then when you look at more sort of specific ways that companies could be aligning their core business strategy or even developing products and services that contribute, you see far less companies are doing so. And then also too, I mean, what's of particular note is, only a quarter of companies are saying that they're setting corporate goals that are sufficiently ambitious, science-based, and aligned to societal needs. And this, we think, is an area of focus for us to help better guide companies and educate them, because we think that this right here could be really the game changer, and this agenda is for companies to really start taking more ambition in terms of how they want to, or how they want to guide their company to address this agenda. And so one way and the thing is, we know it can be done. This year, you may have seen that we launched what we call the 1.5 degree campaign, where we ask companies to set ambitious science-based targets on their carbon emissions to realign their operations to a 1.5 degree future. And we've had to date 177 companies who have agreed to sign up to that. That reflects 2.8 trillion in market cap, 5.8 million employees around the world in 36 countries. Sue, do you want to comment anything further on
I
this
think
agenda?
that what's great is that this is genuinely science-based. The targets are aligned to what the world needs, so we know that that's the ambition that's required, no more, no less. And we, going forward this next decade, that's what we're going to be focusing on. One of the things that will come out soon will be, context-based water targets, so that when organizations are trying to work out, well, what am I supposed to be doing in whatever geography, we'll be able to help a lot more and that sort of thing. That's great. The other thing, just coming back to the last slide, which I think is interesting, is we got about 40% of companies developing products and services which will contribute to the goals. It's probably a missed opportunity. We know that there's 12 trillion in new business opportunity through revenue and savings by developing products and services in that way. So there's business to be had. Right. So, I mean, forgetting all the other things, but people could really, drive more revenue.
That's right.
Through looking through the goals. And actually the initiative that we have on young innovators can help that.
Okay, yeah. And we'll touch on that program in a bit more detail in a few minutes. So where are the challenges? So, we're seeing that there's difficulty in integrating through the organization, through the supply chain. And that's what large companies are saying is their biggest difficulty, is doing just that. And then when you look at the SMEs, and so these are companies that have less than 250 employees, what they point to is their number one challenge is just lacking the financial resources in order to do it. And so this is, in a way, understandable, but then I think that there's ways that we want to help provide better resources and guidance and direction for SMEs to really be able to step up, because if you look at the number of companies around the world, there's SMEs everywhere, and they can really have a good, strong impact.
Yeah, they are 90% of the world's economy. And the other thing that's interesting from this data, Sean, which we also noticed, is that like 63%, it's the number 2 reason why companies join the Global Compact. If we ask companies, why do you join, what do you want? One of them is they want to be able to show their reporting and their transparency. That's been consistent forever. Yeah. But the new number that gets bigger and bigger every year is the number of companies wanting help and guidance for how to translate this across functions and supply chains, which kind of we're seeing in all of the data.
Exactly.
So it's quite clear how we need to work together with businesses to help move this forward.
That's right.
Which comes to the way forward.
The way forward.
I'm just going to highlight a little bit about the projects and initiatives that we have, and then we can open up to some questions. I've highlighted here the 2 driving things that are driving all the way that we want to try and help, support, and work together with organizations. We need to be setting ambitious goals, ambitious being goals that are aligned to the world's needs. We know that a quarter of companies are already doing that. That's the 1.5 degree warming scenario. We need to help with more of that. In the Global Compact, there are amazing examples of very, very ambitious and target setting and delivery against them. We want to share that and make sure that everyone understands that it's entirely doable. Understand how hard it is, but it's doable, and companies that really try to go for that are able to raise money. I mean, investors will much more likely invest in these kind of initiatives going forward. The next point of setting the goals is how do we integrate the actions right across supply chains and all functions, which is obviously what's coming out of the data that Sean has just shared with us. So we have a 35% of companies aligning their strategy with the goals at the moment. And if we can help more organizations do that, it will definitely help all functions and supply chains. And again, we see many examples of good practice in this way, and we really want to be able to share that so that all organizations can sign up to it. I've got a few examples here, although there are many in the Global Compact, but a couple of things that should really help. We are going to commit this next decade to really driving action and impact through organizations. We have, at the moment, 4 what we call global impact initiatives. You could call them accelerators. They're like a year-long program. They're run in each country through the local network. So they're not, it's not a global one. It's very local, very localized and fit for purpose in the country. The fundamental one is the SDG ambition. And in this one, we really want to help organizations mainstream the principles and the goals right through strategies, operations, and then communications. I'll come back to that a little bit later. But the other ones are Target Climate 1.5. Again, that's working with companies, really showing how you can actually set that target and what it takes to deliver against it. The next one is target setting on gender. We want to target gender equality. And we'll have an initiative to really help organizations do the analysis using our gender gap analysis tool, and then work out how to set the right targets and how to drive them. Because target setting in gender it's really complicated. You can't just have the same target everywhere. You need to make sure that it's really realistic in different environments. And then the next one is the Young SDG Innovators Award program, where companies again can work through. It's a classic innovation accelerator, but rather than simply looking at trends, consumer needs, etc., we set the goals at the front of it and make sure, and we try to get the new innovations contribute to the goals. The first one, which I said underpins everything, will be built around this model. We really want to help organizations see how the goals can be put into their strategy, affecting purpose, their governance, their corporate strategy, then how to cascade that through all business units and functions, through the supply chain and the procurement system, and then right into HR and reward systems, and then help in the communication through to financial and non-financial reporting, through communications to all stakeholders, and then obviously through sales and marketing activity where consumers are and customers and clients are going to hear about it, knowing that that is where the big driver of change is happening, in the opinion of CEOs. So on top of these impact initiatives, which are really sort of high touch, high engagement ones, we, as you know, have the Academy Learning Platform, which enables people to tap in online, on-demand platform so that people can get the training that they want on the sessions that they need. And that is available to all participating companies. That's like the how-to. It has a lot of the basics on how you get going. And obviously then the action platforms continue to guide our program, because that's where we get the leading thinking and the solutions delivered by experts and leading companies that we can translate to everyone to solve these problems. This is the Oceans team, and they're working together at the moment. A lot of their work will be showed this year because we have the major Oceans event coming up. Additionally, as I said before, this is really an overview of the data rather than all the details. Do collect the report off our website. In it is details of how by goal kind of activity that's working and what needs to happen. It also gives you a big detail on local activity from our networks, what's happening in each of our networks, so much more data. The other thing as well, Sean and I are always available here for regional breakdown and sector data, which we deliberately haven't shown in here because this was really an overview. We show you just an overview of all the different resources. We've highlighted a few which we think pertain to this analysis, but I mentioned a lot throughout, which we can follow up with a link for you all who've joined on the webinar here. But essentially the first two here on the left-hand side is the progress report, and also the Decade to Deliver is the CEO summary study, which Sean mentioned, but also we'll be doing a full webinar of that in early of next year. We have a documentation of the company signing up to 1.5, a lot of good resources in terms of climate and how we can address the climate issue, and this growing need for us to navigate the future of business and human rights, which is a thorough thing. But anyway, that's more resources that are available to you. So I think we've given a lot of information. Time for a little Q&A now. And as I said, whatever we don't cover here, Sean and I are available to follow up with.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
There's a lot of questions. Okay, we're just
we
just
got
taking a look at them.
questions.
If you just
No worries. Okay. So how can I learn about the global SDG ambition?
SDG ambition.
Yes.
So that's launching already next month.
Yes.
So I mean, we're just doing a lot of like behind the scenes work right now.
Yeah.
But you'll be able to learn a lot more about that particular global impact initiative after the meetings in Davos.
Yeah, it'll all be launched in next month. If you have a local network, get in contact with the local network, because that's how it will be delivered. And otherwise, yeah, contact me because we can give you content and stuff as well. But it'll be delivered in the local network. Yeah, how can we... Okay, so I've got here from Evan Fallon. As a signatory, please, can you see how we can get involved with the activities for 2020? Like to be put in touch with someone to help guide involvement. There's two simple ways to do that. Is either contact the local network or contact your participant engagement manager who runs your region. I mean, if you contact me, I can put you in touch with someone who can give a very clear overview about what's happening globally and in that geography. So I would say you have my email at the end of this. Drop me a line.
Okay, I see a question from Jerry asking about how many respondents came from Africa. We had about 55 or 56 respondents that came from Africa this year for the survey. But if you look at the participant base, actually, I don't know, Sue, if you know that number off the top of your head, but we only have, of the 10,000 companies, is a small percentage.
About 500.
About 500 are from Africa.
At the moment.
At the moment,
Okay,
which
so
we
it's
have
a-
a strategy in place to really
It's a
try
very
to.
engaged region at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
There was a question here, let's move now, but about how can, from Nitesh Dulava, how can better corporate governance help with more action with companies? It can help tremendously. It's a real underpinner. We have an action platform on peace, justice, and strong institutions, which is the leading companies working on this whole area of governance. We've just launched a report and a guidance to global council, to general counsel in companies. So that can really help it. And then it's something that certainly we're going to do a lot more in Africa in terms of understanding governance and how that can impact. It is what drives the Principle 10, in all honesty. So it's a huge impact.
Yeah, I see this question from Matthew regarding similar to the last one I answered about representation from North America.
Yes.
And that's true. Yeah, North America was also, I think we had less than 50 respondents from North America.
Yeah, I think it was something like that.
Yeah, but if you do look at again, of the 10,000 companies, North America also doesn't have as much representation compared to regions like Europe and Asia.
Again, it's about 500.
Yeah.
It's the fastest growing. It grew really fast. It's in North American countries, a number of companies joining grew dramatically last year. Our focus on North America really has been much more focused this year. And I personally see huge interest in North America. And I think the Sustainable Development Goals has really resonating with companies. I think the other thing I find companies in North America is they want to just get on by their own, not worried about regulation and what's happening in the sort of regulation space. They just want to make action, which is great. But it's small at the moment, but growing very, very fast.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I see a question about a public from Marcelo about a public list of companies that signed actions to achieve the goals. This survey is conducted anonymously. So in terms of responses to that particular question, we don't have that publicly available. However, we have our annual disclosure requirement and companies to submit their communication on progress. And when they're submitting that report, we do ask them to indicate which SDGs are reflected in their report. So you can currently, go to our website and look up companies and see, which SDGs they're reporting against. And if it's companies that are more highly engaged, like at the participant level, you'll see already just on their profile page, the SDGs will be highlighted and it's easier,
Yeah, I think that's the best way. On the website, it just clicks up. It automatically shows what goals they're working on. So you can see who's doing what. And then, but in terms of a very, very clear commitment, the science-based targets is a good way of looking at which companies have signed up on climate. So the science-based targets has, I'm thinking 600 off the top of my head, companies signed to align to at least a 2-degree warming scenario, and 77 of them have aligned to the 1.5 this year in response to that challenge. But that's a really good resource for companies taking action on climate. And then the water pledge will also come out next year. And you'll be able to see very, very clearly what that is. And then we will, on all these impact initiatives, we will be showing the targets and companies who are taking very specific targets on gender, on climate, and on integrating the goals as a whole. And that will be shown on the participant profile on our website. So we will see next year and coming on much, much more clarity about who's targeted what on very specific goals.
I don't know, Sue, I see this question from Jean's about asking for more information on the procurement toolkit.
Yes, so there is a procurement toolkit that's in the finalization stages at the moment. It will be out in February, but we can actually send you some highlights on that before and some early thinking. It's coming out of the Decent Jobs action platform. That's the team of companies that are then going to focus. They're going to shift from this this decent job focus right now into living wage. So happy to send you that and some early thinking on that now. What is the most used?
This is an interesting question, which I don't know if I know the answer to, actually. Louisa is asking if there's an equivalent for science-based targets or carbon footprint for social KPIs.
No, not that we know of now.
Not that we know of.
No,
I think there's work
yet.
being done. As far as I understand, I think like the groups like Shift and others.
Well, I think that the two things that I would say is we've just developed a tool with B Lab, the B Corps system company, the organization, which does cover all sustainable development goals, and that's in beta testing at the moment. So, I mean, anyone who's on the B Lab system will have got that. But it's a self-assessment tool, covers questions which go across all of the sustainable development goals and integrate the 10 principles. We've worked in partnership with them so that their questions and the B Lab system actually aligns to the UN, which is really great. That is one way of that will be one way of tracking over time. Obviously, the B Corps measures the same things within that anyway. And we will actually be updating our communication on progress to align to that. The other thing is there is the World Benchmarking Alliance, which it just takes public data and does an index. I mean, that just exists. So you can go on the World Benchmarking Alliance and see what the index against human rights is and what against social processes is. And then some sectors do a lot more detail. So the apparel sector is has had to put so much effort into it, and a lot of it's led by Patagonia. But they have very, very high standards of assessment throughout their supply chains, particularly on social. Yeah, Wendy Rossillo. Is there any way we can help share the actions we make as a company? Yes, we do that through our website. Yeah. The participant profile has automatically uplifts the information from the report, and that's flagged up automatically onto the participant profile. We can make as little or as much of the participant profile as a participant company would like. Yeah. That's about connecting with me and my team. We can work together on it. The companies that are very active and highly engaged, their commitments are on there, their activities on there, case studies and stories are on there. So it's really as much as connecting up with us and making sure it happens.
I see a question about the list of companies that are supporting the ocean principles. Again, that's on our website.
Must be, yeah.
Yeah, so if you look at, if you go to our participant list, you can filter it down by companies that are involved in each of the different action platforms, including the Sustainable Oceans platform. So that's all publicly available information.
And Arturo Reyes is looking for something for SMEs. So I'm sure there is some local information on SME data. We are also now working, we're literally just finalizing some what we need to do on guidance for SMEs. So that will definitely come out next year. Essentially, what we're learning is we just need to simplify the steps, because a lot of the design of a lot of the work is fit for purpose for big organizations, and that's because often it's the big organizations that sit on the action platforms. So a lot of that has to change, and my team are in the process of that, because 65% of the members of the Global Compact are small businesses, and they need low resource, quick, helpful tools. We've started a really good tool on the principles, and we now need to just translate that to the goals. We can get back to you as soon as possible on that.
Yeah, I see this. Do you have a tool for aligning company strategy with the SDGs? I mean, I think one really effective, there's at least two come to mind. There's a blueprint for SDG leadership that we launched, I think already now 2 years ago now.
Yes, there's a little interactive website on that, which is really helpful.
Yeah, and then we also have, which was done in collaboration with GRI and others, a reporting guide on how companies can ensure that they are reporting against the SDG targets.
And I think, and again, that resources have been out and have been helpful, but actually how to use them and get on with it, that's what the SDG Ambition Impact Initiative is literally all about. We understand that the thinking's out there, the content's out there, but really, really helping companies do it in a day-to-day way, which is really helpful for SMEs. That's what this SDG Ambition Impact Initiative, which we launch next year, is completely committed to do. Help people use the blueprint, help people do the reporting, help people do the integration, and set appropriate goals.
See a question about stock exchanges?
Yeah, brilliant.
Brilliant.
So a lot of stock exchanges are signed up to the Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiative, which is great. Essentially, guidance and commitment and leadership from stock exchanges is critical because it shapes the whole environment within which particularly public companies have to operate. I personally can see that myself when I was trying to push this agenda years ago inside Unilever. In the end of the day, if it wasn't what the investors wanted, it wasn't going to trickle down to my targets. So I think it's really, really critical. I would say join the initiative, join the local network, host, we would love to partner, we can host events there, request companies to be reporting on SDGs, non-financial data, and we have a sustainable finance action platform and a CFO network. If anyone's leading a stock exchange and wants to join in on that action platform, that would be a way to be tremendously impactful. That network includes investors, CFOs of corporations who are basically setting their corporate strategy with a view to attracting investment towards the Sustainable Development Goals. And they launched, for instance, the guidance on SDG bonds, and then NL launched SDG bond this year, highly successfully to help fund their shift towards renewable energies. I think we could do one more, Sean.
Yeah, I think one more.
Other initiatives to gather survey data from major companies that have not signed on to a better understanding on how we can bring them on board. Well, the first way I would say, the simple one on that is what the World Benchmarking Alliance do. They take public data and they have created an index. So you can straight away have a look at the world of, it is public, it's not private, and the world's shifting towards private companies, but that if you're on the World Benchmarking Alliance, you can just see the indices by sector of what's happening, of companies whether they're in or whether they're out. That gives us a really good shape. I think that's at the moment the best thing off the top of my head. Yeah, that's public data, and it's analysed and brought together in a full index. Right, I'm told we're having to wrap up, which is fine. Sean and I love talking about it.
I know, yeah, exactly. I could do this all day.
This is our subject. But we will respond to all of these answers, all of the questions, and as we put our emails on the end of this, on the end of these slides to the website, and we'd be really happy to put you in touch with anyone in the organisation, either here or globally in our local networks, who can help. So thank you all very, very much.
Yeah, thank you for your time.
Thank you.